Hey guys, this week we've got Jared Scheffler on the podcast from Whitetail Adrenaline. Pretty excited to have him here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while. I think the timing on it is great with the season starting here in just a few weeks in a lot of parts of the country. And lots of good conversation around, obviously you can't talk to Jared without talking about ground hunting, but we really got into a lot of details around how you do it in terms of whether you're a newer hunter or a more experienced hunter. You know, what things are you looking for in terms of, hey, when do I settle in? When do I keep moving? When do I cover a lot of ground? We also got into a pretty good discussion around the application and use of decoys, how and when to use those. And then we just did some general conversation as well around tips for newer hunters, kind of sorting through a lot of the noise out there in the hunting community and in the hunting advertising space around gear and what you should be running and all this kind of stuff, and just how do you drill it down to the stuff that matters, right? If you're somebody that's newer into hunting, or if you're somebody who maybe hunted growing up and took some time off, but now you're back at it again, basically, where do you spend time that matters and what are those things, right? And then also for guys who maybe have been hunting for a long time, but you're really still pretty inconsistent in terms of your ability to harvest the kind of deer you want to harvest. Some of the things that you can really pay attention to that'll help you level up as you move into the season. So great conversation with Jared. Appreciate y'all being here. As always, your time matters to me. If you will, and you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that notification bell so you know when new videos are coming up. Subscribe and share this video with other people. That helps a lot. If you're over on Apple or Spotify, please follow the podcast and give us a rating. Super helpful. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the podcast with Jared. Jared Scheffler, thanks for jumping on, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
It's awesome having you here.
Yeah.
Been looking forward to this conversation. Been wanting to get you on for a while. So good stuff.
Well, thanks for reaching out and having me on.
Yeah, man. So I have I have people that listen that, well, let me start here. Do you know people, or have you run into people? I know you work like about 4 trade shows a year for Whitetail Adrenaline, right?
Yep.
So how frequently are you running into people who have started hunting like later in life, or people who didn't grow up with a dad who hunted or took them hunting and have had to kind of learn it on their own?
You know,
at your shows and stuff.
You know, at the shows, it comes up. But I don't think I hear that a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean they even disclose that. You know?
Right.
I don't, there's not like a big wave of that I've seen at the shows, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the shows for 16 years, 17, something like that. 17, I think, seasons of On the Road.
Okay.
So, you know, at least at the shows, you know, that doesn't mean that, you know, I mean, sometimes you only get seconds or it gets busy or whatever. So, I mean, not everybody goes into maybe all them details.
I think sometimes those people too are a little sometimes hesitant to even say it because they may, you know, feel whatever, embarrassed because of the things they don't know or whatever. They feel like, oh, I'm asking a stupid question. And that's why, so some of the times that I'll dig into that stuff on the podcast, just because people will send me things like, hey, could you ask, you know, so-and-so this? So what I wanted to kick off with a couple of questions for newer bow hunters, and then I'm going to transition into guys who are more experienced. But when you think about back on, you know, when you were, and I know you started young, but what were some of the initial like keys for you that helped you kind of move along and progress faster? Because I think one of the challenges for people right now that are in a learning phase is there's so much information out there that they just kind of get buried in it.
Yeah. So like a lot of things, you're a coach, so you know the 80-20 rule.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, so there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of techniques, methods, and you know, whatnot. But really, I think if a person can identify a handful of like what I'd call the big nuggets and work on that and putting dirt in those holes first, I think you'll advance in success. And success in hunting is determined by a lot of different factors, depending on the type of individual. But I mean, as far as like having great encounters and whatnot, and you know, and there is a lot of great information out there from a lot of sources. You know, way back when I was young, I was fortunate. My dad was a very good hunter and still is, and very non-mainstream, off the cuff kind of, you know, trapper, woodsman type. My mom just sent me a photo the other
So you
day.
got it built. It was built into you.
Yeah, yeah. I pull it up here. My mom, she used to hunt, but here's one like in the newspaper she sent me the other day. She hasn't.
Oh, that's cool.
But my mom's in there. And she used to, you know, my dad was a big trapper too, and so my dad instilled, I'd say, quite a bit of something early on, and I don't think you hear it all the time. Cover ground. I don't remember him really vocalizing it. That's just what we did. Like we were, you know, bow hunting. Most of the bow hunting, he'd take me out and just point at a tree. You think you can get in that crotch or on that limb or whatever. You know, never a tree stand. But even in that, it was rare that we actually went. Like he took me back to that same tree. We were bouncing around continually, you know, staying on top of where he thought the deer might be. You know, I mean, maybe if you had a good sit, you'd come right, pop back right in there. But he was a very mobile hunter, even though the bow hunting was primarily, you know, in a tree. I started hunting deer from the ground with a bow, not exclusively, but more back in my teenage days, you know. And I remember hearing stories about my dad would do that. But when he took me out bow hunting, he, right from, you know, the time I started bow hunting, I don't even know if I remember a time we were actually together hunting out in the woods. Okay, I'm going to go up here 200-300 yards. You plop up right there, and you know, and that's kind of how we did it. So that you hear it quite a bit from the do-it-yourself hunters today, is that verbal cover ground, and that is arguably the number one. You know, different styles maybe change a little bit, but that's probably the number one. You know, going to all these different states and regions, and I mean, we did that locally growing up. We'd cover quite a bit of ground right within our local area. But that one right there, if you get good at that, you'll shave a lot of. You'll find a lot of success, and then you got to hone it from there too. You know, I mean, you start covering ground, you can get ultra aggressive.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're telling people to cover ground, what do you know, what's the next step in that as you're talking to people, or you're giving somebody, you know, with less experience guidance as they're covering ground? What are you focusing in on to kind of say to you, okay, this is a spot that I want to learn more about, or this is a spot that, you know, I want to settle into for a little while?
Yeah, whether they're a ground hunter or a tree stand hunter or a saddle hunter, you know, I think going out there on a hunt for an evening or a morning, you know, not that much happens. It's usually best to keep moving. And you know, sometimes it's like, oh, I think this is going to be pretty hot in here in a week, you know, but that comes with a little more experience. New hunters might not be able to detect that, like, hey, I'm a week early here, or in this particular spot, or whatnot. So the one thing to a new hunter, you might make a lot of mistakes along the way in covering ground, but you'll learn. You'll get good at it the more mistakes you make, and you're really, I think, covering so much. You're putting yourself in a broad number of scenarios that maybe a stationary, just going to the same location every day, you're not going to learn and absorb as much detail and because when you're covering ground, you're also new settings, new terrains, new, there's so many skills that get honed in different ways. Like, oh, I went in a little too aggressively, and I bumped some deer here, or whatever. There's so many little micro things that I think get honed in that as well. So, to a new hunter, and you also got to find what you enjoy. There's a lot of hunters that love going to the same location and just they're not out there with too much of a care to necessarily fill a tag. They're just, getting away from work or, enjoying their time out there. So, there's also that, people hunt for a variety of reasons. So,
yeah. So what's the goal? Right.
Yeah. And each individual has to set that. What's kind of important to them. I love hunting on the ground, but I don't think it's for everybody, So when we started doing that exclusively back in 2010, we absolutely loved it, but we didn't put the company on a course to set an agenda like, hey, this is how you have to hunt. It's the hunter to find,
What is it that you loved about it compared to, when you went to exclusively being on the ground, what was it that you were just like, this is what I'm going to do from now on?
Well, I did a reflection, and over a number of years, like I said, I was hunting on the ground with a bow, not exclusively, but with a bow back in my teenage days. Well, as I kind of went through the Rolodex, and I used to play have the 10-pound tree stands as I grew a little bit older and kind of started doing a little bit of my own thing. My dad, we didn't run tree stands, but I got a couple 10-pounders and, we'd bounce around. I say a couple because I was doing some film and just getting my experience a little bit back then. So we'd be popping in and out, but then hunting on the ground too. And I kind of went through the Rolodex and I'm like, man, I get on more situations, more encounters. I'm on top of the deer more when I just stay mobile. So there's a number of things. It's also can be very challenging and very difficult to actually be successful in that. And it's an adrenaline rush. It's also like if you've hunted like exclusively from a tree stand or say a blind, when you're face to face with them on the ground and there's no blind, it's kind of got a like more, wow, I'm right there on the same plane as them.
Yeah. I've seen some of those scenes where you're like, you're sitting behind that decoy and it's like that buck's 5 feet from you and doesn't even know you're there. Like that seems like that would be the adrenaline rush right there.
It's intense. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be wild. So are those kind of encounters that were just like, I want more of these. So it just kind of makes it easier to stay on the ground because the encounter's so different.
It was back in that era. We were mainly weekend warriors trying to produce this public land video series and produce enough content to release a successful film each year, which was pretty much unheard of in the public land space as far as a season after season, multiple good animals hitting the ground. That was not really something that it was like, that's impossible to a lot of people. And we thought it might be too, but we were a few seasons in getting more and more aggressive with it. And there, ended up being quite a few challenges with 2 guys on the ground and trying to film it. But I was like, we don't have a lot of time. We're more weekend warriors. We'd do a couple 3 to 5 day hunts in there, but for the most part, we're weekend warriors with one video camera. And I was like, well, we're going to probably capture more situations doing it this way. It's going to be super engaging. It really fits me and how I like to hunt. I think it's going to be really engaging for the viewer too. and fresh. So it was kind of like this beautiful blend of many things that just made it was all meant to be. Like it fit me and my hunting and what I like to do. Cause I was like, I went through that. I was like, well, I know it's going to be a hit in terms of engagement for viewers, but I was like, am I doing it for that? And I was like, no more than thought that. And it's like, no, I've been hunting on the ground for years and those are my favorite hunts, so it fit me, and so it wasn't compromising for video's sake, but I 100% knew that it was going to engage people more too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So as you're, when you were talking earlier about, being mobile, covering ground, and you're talking to somebody who's, okay, I haven't done that before, really. What are you telling them, or what would be a couple tips that you would give them as they go in and they start to work an area? Like, how do you know to keep pushing forward versus, okay, this feels like a decent spot. I'm going to like hang tight here for a little bit and just see what happens and see if I can observe. Like what's the trigger to you to kind of settle versus continuing to move?
It's dependent. There is no, you just have to get out there and do it. And then you begin to hone the more situations and scenarios you go off of your instincts on that. And, I think that's the only real way to do it. I can't really put it in, there's not a one size fits all to it. But you learn from it as you go. It's like, oh, I pushed a little too hard or a little too far or a little too aggressive. And I thought, maybe 50 yards ago, maybe I should put on the brakes and just kind of hunker down here for a little bit. And I should have done that in that particular case, because now I blew all the deer out, because, we hunt on the ground a lot, but there's some situations where it's like we still hunt in there, and then it's like, now we're going to put on the brakes for a little while and be stationary. And being really effective at ground hunting, it takes some time for the hunter to do this, but developing the passive aggressive, knowing when I really need to put on the brakes here, and other situations or moments within that situation where it's like, I got to haul the mail and I got to get there right now where I need to be. And then the last 20 yards when I'm getting there, I can't haul the mail anymore and I have to go at a snail's pace. You know what I mean? So now you're going into passive, really non-aggressive approach, but the hunter develops that, and I think gets it finessed more and more as time goes on. And each individual is going to come in with their own individual temperament, and some will come in too soft and too cautious. Really, if it's more of a passive type personality, they're most likely going to enter the ground hunting game primarily running a passive approach, and then they might find, I need to amp up my aggressiveness. Now, if you get somebody that's like really kind of got an aggressive temperament or a make stuff happen kind of temperament, they're probably going to enter the ground hunting game over the top too aggressive, and that's going to hurt them more in that space. And they're going to eventually probably tone it down a bit or get it honed, their ability to detect, like, okay, now I need to slow it down. Chansey is a prime example of that. I mean, he's wired 100 mile an hour, and that first year he came in, I mean, he was, all aggressive, and he very quickly on his own just recognized that, and it was like a 180 switch. Not that he isn't ultra aggressive, but he got so sharp on and so quick. A lot of people, I think it might take several seasons, but it was like a 1 season switch, and it was like, whoa.
He just knew when to settle down.
Yep.
Yeah. Go hard, and then all of a sudden throttle it back.
And now you watch those. I mean, he's killed so many mega giants on our series, and you watch him, you'll see that, okay, he's hauling the mail right now in this particular situation or moment of that situation. And now all of a sudden it's like you see him and he's goes ultra passive and he's very successful. When he finds a big one and he gets on it, he's pretty successful at it.
Yeah, he's got an instinct on
Yeah.
when to go hard and when to pull back.
Yeah.
Like a really strong one. So last question for the kind of the newer guys. What are a couple, whether you want to use the word myths or just things that are overblown, making too much noise, what are a couple things that people you think may tend to focus too much on that really don't make such a big difference, but are getting a lot of noise right now in the hunting industry?
Ooh, I don't even know what is getting noise.
If you're at 4 shows a year, you're hearing something, right?
Well,
there's just so much gear and there's so much stuff out there right now, and it seems like that it's very easy to become gear centric as opposed to really understanding, and being really learning how to be a woodsman and understanding animals.
That's something my dad warned me of that when I was young. My dad was a very minimalist type. And as I got a little bit older in my teenage years, I kind of got a little bit more product, oh, this is what the pros are, or this is what, and as time went on, I actually went the other direction, more in the direction that my dad just did. And I also, early on, this is around the time of the start of the series, it's like the principle of being a good hunter has nothing to do with the products that you're using. They can help assist and aid and make you successful on a particular hunt, but it's not making you a better hunter. And I really believe that that's true. They help a hunter be more successful in certain situations, but a person can almost get handicapped by it if they come to rely on it too much, I think too. Now I will say I would be very handicapped without good optics. So that's one product.
Yeah, especially what y'all do.
One product that, at least for me and my hunting style, absolutely it makes a big difference for me. But I am very, very, a lot of times I think in Jim and I, my cousin, early on when we started the series, we had discussions about this, how back then, that's almost 2 decades ago, how it almost had that feel like you had to spend 10 grand just to buy stuff to get into hunting. And we liked just showing how little a person needs without making it a formal, like really discussing it or talking about it, but just the video showcasing that, driving a piece of crap car and, no ammo half the time. And,
I think that's that's one of the things I love about what y'all do is because it's very easy, especially if you get into hunting later in life and, you've got a good career or whatever, and you've got money. So the easiest barrier to entry is gear, right? And so it's very easy to be like, oh, I can get gear and learn all about the gear because that's something that there's a shorter learning curve on, and financially you're not restricted on it. But it's like you said, it can be a crutch because you can just spend all your mental energy on the gear part, right, and you're not spending your mental energy on the part that actually makes a difference.
Yeah. And that's no disrespect to any of the products or
no, not at all. They all have a place, right? If you use correctly.
Yeah, they've gotten so honed and everything. It's if a person can afford them and everything, that's awesome. But I think for a new person getting in, or maybe a young kid that young kid doesn't, maybe their parents don't hunt, and you don't have to get all the stuff right away, to get rolling in it. And the less you have, the more you're going to hone your hunter skills too.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you said earlier too that makes it, if you're moving a lot and you are being aggressive and you're covering ground, yes, you're going to probably make a lot more mistakes, but B, you're going to learn from those mistakes faster than if you're just kind of parked in the same place and you know, especially if you're in a low deer density area and you don't even see deer, you know, sometime during the entire day, you've learned nothing.
There's one key thing to that though, is if the hunter makes a mistake in there, but doesn't like dissect it and face reality of it, of what they could have maybe done differently, then there is no learning that actually happens. They don't face reality. And so an example of that is if I blow a deer out, a big buck, and I'm like, well, I blew him out. He got me. The wind switched for a second and he got me. Well, what could I have maybe done? Maybe I cut it a little too tight, that wind, right? And maybe I should have took it just a little bit wider in case that would happen. Because that's a real scenario that's happened to me multiple times over the years where I'm cutting it real tight and that one's got me. And it's like, well, the easy thing would be like, well, the wind, I can't control what the wind does, but I can control that. Maybe I could have stayed just a little bit, not cut it so tight on it. And then that maybe wouldn't have happened. There's usually a risk on the other side. Usually they see you a little bit better if you're taking it wider, but that's an example of that particular, you know, if a hunter breaks down, okay, this is what happened. The wind did do that, but what could I have maybe done to get around that?
Yeah. No, I had a situation last year where I hadn't hunted from the ground before, and I went to a place in Missouri that I had never hunted before, and I got in there a little bit later in the day, and so I worked my way in, and I found a spot that I thought looked like a pretty decent spot, and it was during the rut, and I don't know if you use antlers, like if you rattle at all, but I rattled in a buck who was about it was kind of like it was the end of a small cornfield with timber on each side. And I didn't even hear him come in. I just was, you know, sitting there behind a tree. And all of a sudden I looked over, and on the other side, probably 40 yards away, I could see his body. Couldn't see his head or anything else like that. So didn't know, you know, whether it was one I was going to shoot at. And so I was super impatient, right? I kind of hung out for like 5 minutes. He never moved. And then I snort wheezed at him because I wanted to see if he would I had a doe decoy like sitting out in the pasture, and I was thinking I might be able to pull him into it, but he just took off, you know. And then I kind of had to like go back on that one. Go, okay, I was way too impatient.
Yeah, you know, and it you know, the next time that could have worked perfect. We have situations like that come up that it's, oh well, we had one last fall. You know, one that off the top of my head, it's like, we don't need to get in there another 10 yards. We're doing pretty good right here. As the wind dies down, the wind could kick a little bit, so that could burn us. You know, and so we didn't do that, and that could have burnt us if we did that too. But now we wish we would have moved in there 10
right. You can always second guess yourself too. So
yeah, and you gotta be careful. You gotta be careful with that, because once you start to get a certain level of experience and things are coming together, you can sometimes overthink, and I call it the battle of the minds, where your instincts are running one thing and the conscious kicks in and says, no, I think you should do this. And now there's a conflict up there, and there's a hesitation, and that might burn you, because now you're burning up time fighting the battle of the minds.
So that's an interesting like thought process right there. So let's just say you're in that situation, right? Do you have a fallback? Like, do you fall back to the instinct, or do you, like, if you're not sure and your brain's telling you one thing, but your instinct is telling you something else, do you just kind of I go with the instinct in that situation? Or is it? In
my evaluation, whether it's hunting or many other things, once a person gets to a certain level of experience, I think most of the time their instincts are going to be the right, accurate call, because that deeper mind is running all kinds of calculations and going through the Rolodex of experiences, and it comes to that conclusion like that of what you should do, and based on all of that. And so, and I've had conversations with very new hunters, first season hunters, that after having the conversation, well, they did a hunt and they pretty much were running. They weren't overthinking. They were running off their instincts, and they were very successful. So I'm not saying that is only the case if a person gets more experience. What I do think is the instincts might not be as accurate in the early days of gaining experience, but it will hone itself as time goes on, and those instincts, I think, can be more trustable, that is the right decision. Chancey and I, we ran into this years ago. There was a season or two where he's got a lot of experience hunting. I've got a lot of experience hunting, and we'd be together, and he would want to get my opinion on what I think, and I would want to get his opinion. What do you think? And we're putting our thoughts together, and we burnt up too much time. Multiple scenarios where we burnt up 3 minutes, 5 minutes going back, and we kind of realized it, like, even though I might have a lot of experience, you just got to run with what you're thinking, because it's probably we're probably on very similar wavelengths, and all we're doing is costing and burning up time here, and that burnt us. That one season, I forget how many scenarios where it's like we were 30 seconds too late, and if we wouldn't have sat there and done all
deliberated over the whole thing,
if we would have and we evaluated what our first instinctual thoughts were to do, we evaluated that, and that would have been the right decision on, I think, all of them. So
Hey guys, big thanks to Osseo Gear for supporting the show. Osseo is built specifically for bow hunters. Every stitch, zipper, and fabric choice is made to perform when it's quiet and the pressure's on. Their camo patterns are inspired by nature's predators, and they're purpose-built to ensure you blend naturally into the specific environment you are hunting. Make sure to use the code DONOTGO20 to get 20% off on your purchases at OsseoGear.com. Osseo is made for bow hunters by bow hunters. So give them a check. They're a big supporter of the podcast, and we appreciate them. Great gear. So let's talk a little bit about people who, not inexperienced hunters at this point, but people who have hunted for quite a while, but see inconsistent success, right? What do you think separates the guy that kind of closes every year, right? That is able to make it happen some way, shape, or form, versus the person who kind of consistently stays inconsistent?
I think the best way I can put that is, we were talking about all this ground hunting, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I know a lot of very successful hunters that are very successful every single year that have a different approach or a different method or a different way, and they've figured out what works really good for them. Right? Mm-hmm. And that makes them successful because it works really well for them, which probably has something a little bit to do with their temperament and personality and everything too. There's probably some variables in there. Now that might not necessarily work that well for me or for the next hunter, but I think any of those really successful hunters that are, just repeats at it, they've really, I think, figured out a system that works really good for who they are, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not just because it works really well for them, might not be what works really well for the next hunter. And so I think the hunter has to kind of, figure out what kind of works for them, and by trying a multitude of different things. And a lot of times they come up with some sort of hybrid of, using this, that might be one method from one successful hunter and another from another, and kind of building their own hybrid. I got a really good buddy, extremely successful, under the radar guy, no social media. He's about my age. he's probably the best I've ever met at just repeatedly being successful on public lands and do it yourself. And he, like I said, totally low key, just doesn't even want anybody to know.
Does he travel all over the place? Does he pretty much hunt like a home area?
Several states. And he pretty much fills his tag on a good animal in all them states. And years ago, I evaluated because his style is different than mine.
How does he hunt, just in general?
Now, how he's since he's shifted and he's still greatly successful. Mm-hmm. But he used to do lots of pre-scouting. He'd drive to these states in the summer and fall, run cameras, and do all that. And back in that era, when I kind of was evaluating that, I was seeing how that a lot of times hurt and handicapped a guy that would do that to a certain degree. It might give him a leg up on certain situations, but it blew my mind how successful he was within that. And I kind of did a bit of an evaluation on that and having different conversations with him. Well, he was able to do what most are not. And if he got, like, let's say he did 3 summer pre-scouting to another state and running cameras, and he got out there for the hunt, and if it was like ice cold, he would completely vacate and start fresh. And most can't do. They get attached to all the plan, time and effort and the plan and everything. So he was able to do all that, which I was like, that's actually probably the best, because in quite a few cases he'd have more of a heads up start on where he's starting point than I would, where I'm just showing up that when hunting starts, I'm not doing any of that pre-scouting and stuff. And so he would have more of a leg up, but he still had the ability to sense, I need to pull the plug and relocate and find new areas. And so now for several years, he doesn't do much of that anymore, but he also gained so much experience over the years that I think he can read it on the flies. And I think he realized he could read it on the fly so much that he didn't need to really do all that anymore.
So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I've heard you talk about that in the past, that you really don't do any pre-scouting. You're not all over Onyx and all that stuff that, everybody else is talking about 24/7. Is that something that you think is feasible for less experienced hunters to be able to, like, do you think that they would learn faster by not doing that and going in and just, kind of cutting their teeth by trying to figure it out when they got to a place versus all the pre-scouting and all the stuff that, everybody's talking about right now?
I think it would depend on the individual. I think it would depend a lot on the individual. So I don't think it's necessarily the right call one way or the other. One thing I will say is, if you're not doing any of that, and you're showing up just without any background scouting or any of that, you're maybe more apt to hone your abilities to get on point real quick. It actually blows my mind when I stop and think about it. I mean, without doing any pre-scouting and any of that, like how fast we're able to, not always, but how fast we're able to, we don't always kill them either, but find big bucks and get on them or whatnot, and have it so repeatable from one season to the next. And some seasons are better kill seasons than others, but I mean, consistently consistently finding them without any prior information or anything like that.
Can you give a couple, without obviously giving away too much, but can you give just a couple general tips to people that, like, if somebody was like, hey, because I think there, at least from what I've been talking to people, having people on the podcast, I am seeing a trend of people who, for a few years were running cell cameras everywhere, right? And now they're, I'm running a few cell cameras, but I'm kind of going back to, soaking SD cameras or, yeah, I think just almost like our kids who are getting overloaded on social media. Like I've got a 19-year-old daughter who like limits herself on social media, uses a flip phone because she kind of recognizes that it's too much. I see hunters doing the same thing. Right. So do you have a couple general tips for people if they're just like, hey, I'm going to go like do that this year. I'm not going to do a bunch of pre-scouting, roll into an area. Just a couple general ideas, like where do you start with doing something like that if you're not going to pre-scout it like crazy online?
Here again, we were talking about covering ground earlier, and
Yeah.
a lot of times when we're covering ground, we're making mental notes of where the pressure's at too, where the hunting.
That's a great point.
And the problem, and I mean, I predicted this years ago when the online mappings began to get more handy on the phones and stuff. Well, if you're a public land hunter, everything that looks good
looks good to everybody else.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be very good, So, which I'd say isn't always true, but there's multiple variables there. I mean, once the rut happens, you could have a piece of public that looks amazing on the map, or a part of this piece of public that looks amazing on the map, and it could be getting pounded by hunters every single day. And the rut comes around, and it's been crap hunting there, and all of a sudden some mega giant from 2 miles over that freed up with his doe is now looking for another one, and then ends up there and doesn't realize it's been getting hunted every single day and pressured. So we've seen that. We've seen cases where it's like, are we generally trying to avoid pressure and keeping an eye on it? Yeah, but have we seen like mind-boggling, like, there's been guys parked here every day. Why is this big buck here?
Why is that
another one? Yeah, and they're like right by the parking lot. We've seen situations like that. So it's, and that's kind of the evaluation that I've come to on most of those particular cases is those deer are probably not local residents of right there, and they drifted from a mile, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles away and ended up there just in that moment, and don't realize there's been a bunch of hunting pressure there all year,
Yeah.
So
I heard you say somewhere before that you felt like when you spent a lot more time on the ground, your reliance on the rut really dissipated.
Oh, how good the rut was?
Well, yeah, I think in the context, what you were saying was, you didn't have to rely on the rut nearly as much when you started spending a lot more time on the ground. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. It's not that I'm not relying on the rut, but back 15, 20 years ago, and you heard this and you maybe still do from quite a few, the rut wasn't very good this year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't notice that. I think we've had one season that it's like, ooh, but because you're covering so much, what we found is whether we have a good rut or not isn't really whether the rut's good or not is much, because we're covering so much ground that we're not dependent on that, because we're kind of like finding where that rutting action is. We actually got a joke about this in the next season coming out. It was Chancey and I actually said, I wonder where the word rut came from. Like, we're stuck in a rut. Everybody waits for the rut. Like, that word doesn't even fit, but we didn't really expand on it beyond that. But yeah, that's why it's, so many hunters. I had a guy a few years ago. He was on an out-of-state hunt, and he was more doing stationary stuff at that time on that particular hunt. And he messaged me. He was messaging me a little bit throughout the hunt and said how he was seeing all kinds of bucks and da-da-da-da. And then I don't know if it was 2, 3, 4, 5 days later, he's like, I'm seeing nothing. Like, it's been dead for 2 days. I've been popping into, And I was like, yeah, I was like, they're all locked down. So not right now, I think would be a good time to just cover ground and on foot to find them. Cause they get locked up with a doe, and pretty soon there's 3-4 bucks, satellite bucks. So you're not even seeing them cruising around anymore. And so much of that, when they get clustered like that and they're in that lockdown stage, there's so much acreage that is just dead. And then a lot of times once they get locked down with a doe, not always, like the prairies is a different deal, but a lot of times they don't move far throughout a couple 3 days period. So they're highly concentrated in these little pockets, and the satellite bucks are there too, and they're not covering much ground. Now in the open country, that's different. They can cover miles. One buck comes in and it's like they can take and run for a couple miles. But generally in that, more timber stuff, especially if you've got a big old mature buck, I mean, there's no reason to run long ways. So that's a great time for somebody that's more a stationary hunter or been more of a stationary hunter. And they're like, this hunting on the ground's been kind of like, I've been thinking about it a little bit. Well, maybe this year, when you sense that lockdown stage is hit, maybe that's time to, maybe I'll try this ground hunting in that moment. And that'd kind of be a little bit of a hybrid hunting mode for this fall. I mean, I've had many hunters over the years come up to me at a show or email me. I never hunted on the ground, and I spent the whole season hunting on the ground, and I had more encounters than I've ever had in any season, and oftentimes they didn't kill one, but they lit them up, they were close. Sometimes they killed, but that's maybe one particular thing that somebody new to it, you don't have to exclusively hunt on the ground or from a tree stand or, a blind or whatever. You can hybrid and bounce around, pick your times to do that,
Yeah. I think that's a really smart. I've never heard anybody say that, but from a thought process standpoint, if you're in the middle of the rut and you're in lockdown, why not just get out of the tree, like you said, and cover ground instead of just sitting there and seeing nothing? Because they're like you said, they're pocketed up. He may have that doe pinned down for a day, 2 days, and then if there's another one close, he's not going very far.
Yeah.
So
even in timber and wooded country,
mm-hmm.
we accidentally killed 2 this way. We were walking. We weren't even trying to be sneaky, and flushed the big buck on the doe, gave him a half hour, 45 minutes, and then just went slowly in the direction they went and found him and killed him. And then it accidentally happened. And then we actually started implementing that during lockdown as a tactic. Like, why not just, if the woods is open enough that I could see them, get my visual that, yes, it is a big buck. Even though I just blew him, he's going to try to stop her as quick as possible. And we found they'd only go 150 to 400 yards in wooded or timber or stuff. That's all the further. So it's like, I know that they're somewhere right up ahead in this little sliver almost every time. And even though I just bumped them and they know I was a human, they now if it's not rut, they'll do the looping and cover much more ground. But during that lockdown, I mean, I think maybe that guy I was telling you about, I think he maybe implemented that strategy and killed one doing that. I didn't round back, but he ended up getting on the ground and killing one. And I think that's how he did it.
What happened in that specific situation with you that you just said that y'all like walk through that for people?
Yeah. Well, there's so much in lockdown. There's so much, you can cover a lot of ground, and if you go too slow, you'll never cover enough ground, perhaps, to have that happen. So what we kind of began to realize is maybe we're better off to move at a pretty good clip, fast enough clip moving pace to cover enough ground to actually bump a big buck on a doe, cover enough ground to do that.
What does that look like?
Well, it might be 5 miles in the timber. Let's
gotcha.
Say, or it could be even more. But if we'd go too slow, like trying to be sneaky, not to bump them,
you're not going to get anywhere.
We're not going to cover enough ground necessarily to. And every situation and scenario is different. I mean, you might get a good feeling there's something right up ahead, and then you do maybe slow those, put those brakes on, and maybe you do pick them off before they see you. Outside of rut, different deal. It's
right.
We're not doing that. We're trying to spot them before they ever see us, and then make a play from there. But I mean, that's kind of an out there technique that ended
makes
up
a lot of sense, though. I like it.
Accidentally done by us a couple of times.
I mean, it's actually something I will do that this year, because I remember being in Missouri last year, and I think I got up there like right at the back end of, not at the back end of the rut, but a couple days before lockdown, and I saw a number of smaller bucks. It was pretty busy, and then literally it was just dead for a couple days, and I knew I was in lockdown, but I was kind of like not really sure. Okay, what do I move? I ended up moving to a different tree, and I was trying to kind of figure out where they were. But in retrospect, or like listening to you, okay, it'd be a lot easier to figure out what they were if you cover a bunch of ground versus, okay, I'm going to go sit here for 6 hours and hope something walks by, and then that doesn't happen. Now I'm going to go sit somewhere else. You've really only covered a couple areas by doing that.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
And I mean, it's one of them things that, is it going to work every time? No. Is it going to work for everybody? Not necessarily. But there's a lot of people that once they hit that lockdown stage, it's pretty dead around them.
Yeah.
And so it's just a tactic. And here's the other thing is even if you don't kill them that day, if you find them locked down, I mean, they might not be that far the next day, and now you got a good starting point for the next day. We used to do that quite often too, and we still do a lot, is we might go into a spot on the ground, and we're going to kind of sit more stationary in that particular case once we get to where we're going. But if it's getting down to the like last half hour and we're not feeling it, we will get out of there, or get to another part just to get eyes on a lot of acreage to try to get a starting point for the next day.
Yeah.
That's a method we don't really talk about that much, just not for any reason other than Tanner's brought it up, I think, on a podcast a couple of times, and but that's something that
it's very elky, or that people do that a lot when they're elk hunting. They'll just cover a lot of ground and like, okay, I didn't really get on anything today, but if you can get to a glassing knob or get to a spot and locate them, I've got a buddy of mine who he lives out in Montana, and if they can't get anything during the day, they go and they drive around at night and call at night just to locate them so they know where to start in the morning.
So they know. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Similar concept. Y'all have had obviously a ton of success and some crazy encounters using decoys.
Yeah.
Just in general, like, what's your overall philosophy when it comes to deploying decoys? And, do you ever use, because I haven't seen everything y'all have done. I've seen the hand mounted decoy a lot, but do you use regular decoys? Like, what's your general philosophy around decoy and decoy usage?
Primarily that's the one we use, is that one we built. The philosophy behind it is it's a tool just like a grunt tube, just like rattle antlers. It's a lot of times it's not wise to pull it out. The situations, what we've found is when it works so magically when it does work that it makes it feel like that's all I got to do every year.
Well, when I watched y'all do it a couple times, and I saw that one get like,
depending on that, they're going to find out they're going to get burnt a lot doing
either that or you just want it to happen over and over because it's so freaking cool.
Like I said, when it does work, it seems like it works so magical that it's like, I can do this all the time. And it doesn't work like that. So reading the situation and knowing when to deploy it, how far out to deploy it, what's the strategy. We got pretty solid at that over the years. And, people haven't seen as much of that in our content, probably the last few years. Not this season, the following season coming out, we got some pretty incredible.
Pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. I think I've heard, so, if someone else was, okay, well, how do I use it or when do I use it? Based upon what I think the way that I've heard you talk about it in the past, it's less about, like there's some general rule and much more about your observation of that specific buck, right? And kind of, okay, how does he engage with other deer around him to know whether or not this is a good idea with this animal or not at this time or not?
Yeah.
That,
a lot of times,
general,
a lot of times it's the doe. That's the bugger. A lot of times, like, I mean, you might get a doe that she wants to trade up and she likes your decoy. You might get that. You might get a doe that's like been getting pestered by all kinds of bucks and is happy with the buck she's got and doesn't want anything to do with it, doesn't want the drama, and you're 200 yards out and deployed that thing, and she's like, I'm out, I'm gone. Or she might detect that something's not right there, and her wits are still there. So that's where it's like, it's just it's another tool to have in the arsenal that sometimes it works and is a good thing, but not always.
So is there a specific time of, like, do you only use a decoy during the rut, essentially? Is there ever other times of the season that you use a decoy? Is it pretty much a rut tactic for you?
Primarily, though we have used it in certain cases or in a certain way outside of rut. Chancey, he'll use it a lot of times like pre-rut when he's going into rattle, just to draw attention away from him and the filmer. So, but primarily it's more of a rut tool.
I've seen the buck decoy. Do you also have a doe decoy or not? Or do
you we've got a few. Chancey, we've got a couple of the ultimate predator decoys, and that's a really good one for people that are looking to get into that decoy game. And then Chancey, custom made.
I was going to say, he's got a real head on his, doesn't he? Like,
that's our main decoy. But he he was on a hunt. That'll be in the next, not this season coming out, but the one that follows. He was on a hunt. And they were in wide open country, and he's like, I got to have a decoy on the filmer. And he was with TC, and he's an artist. So what did he do? He got a piece of cardboard, and in about an hour or less, he whipped up a couple of versions of doe decoys that could strap right on the camera, and they went in there, and he shot a mega giant doing it, and they were fully exposed, both of them.
He just whipped it up out of cardboard?
Yeah.
How did he make it look real?
Paint.
Just
He's
paint.
an artist. And it does. I mean, it looks real. Like, I see this thing at like 30 feet, and I was like, oh my God, that looks so good. I mean, it would get me for a second, or two, and maybe even longer. But
that's crazy.
And then I think TC filmed Tanner too. After that, they same thing, open country, and that's how they did it. I mean, that was like golf course open country. So
was that Kansas?
Yeah.
Okay. What are a couple mistakes that you see people make with decoys, or the most common mistakes that you see people making when they're using decoys?
Well, I'd have to refer to mistakes that we've made with them in our application, how we use them. One of the earlier mistakes that we learned this pretty quick, was try not to deploy it and get as close as you can without it, and try to read the animal. So if you're fortunate enough to get a situation where you got a buck locked down with a doe, thinking, I'm going to use this decoy somehow. And if you're fortunate enough that there's satellite bucks kind of bebopping around, you'll get a sense of how aggressive the mature buck with the doe that you're trying to hunt is. And you'll get an idea like, oh, he'll leave that doe 70 yards to go run off another big buck. Or this one, he's not going 20. Well, that's where you want to be careful how fast how far out you are when you deploy it. Because if you deploy it too early and he's not going to come the distance, now you've just drawn all kinds of attention to yourself. And now you got to close that distance, and chances are him or the doe are going to pick up something's not right when you do try to close that distance. So that's one tactic that with the decoy. Now, there's a lot of situations where it's like, I think we can do this without the decoy at all, which is probably the right decision in that particular case. For a number of reasons, maybe. Here again, you're drawing attention. Even though it's a decoy, you're drawing a lot of attention to yourself very quickly and for a long duration if you can't get the shot right then. So we kind of learned there's a time and a place for it. That's why I was saying it's just a tool that sometimes it's like, yep, this is what we should do here. But it might be best to not deploy it at all and just go in and kill them straight up without it. So that was one thing that I remember that we realized, because the first time we got it to work, it worked so good that it was like,
we're going to do this a lot.
Yeah, this can't be real. Well, we learned, we evaluated that after we had a couple more situations that went south doing it. And we're like, okay, here's what happened. The doe she didn't have eyes on the decoy. And in that particular case, that big buck never locked eyes on the decoy. He kept it in his peripherals. So he never caught that there was something funny with it. So it worked really good that first time in a crazy way. For that reason, primarily, I would say, for those reasons.
It sounds like you probably have, but I'm going to ask you, give me a specific situation that maybe resonates with you. Have you ever had a decoy like completely blow up in your face and make something that you felt really good go south really quick?
Yeah.
What happened?
That first season, it's on the video series. I deployed it too quick. And that was, again, after a season or two of that, we kind of learned and I realized it shortly after I deployed it. I was like, that was so dumb. Didn't need to do that.
Now I'm committed to it though. I'm here.
Yeah. And it took quite a bit of time for that big one to lose focus on us. And once he did, I didn't redeploy it, and we crawled in there, and I should have killed that deer, but I was trying to get Andy, who was filming, I was trying to get a little clip of him in the weeds.
I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah,
before.
It was like 180-inch 5x5 mega giant proud deer. And
I have to get a picture of him sitting there.
I knew it was thick weeds, and I knew he was somewhere in there. And all of a sudden, I was with the binoculars, I'm going through the weeds, and they're tall. They're as tall as me.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden I picked him or her up, and I was like, I'm a film. I need a shot of this. And so I got Andy up there, which was high risk because we're very skylined. They're laying low down in the weeds. We're standing up because we have to be to get this. And looking back on it, I was like, the viewer was never going to see that little bit of what I saw was a deer anyways. It was so stupid,
Too much production in your head, right?
Although we almost killed that deer, it could have cost me. And we've got many situations on the series where we've deployed it too early and sent, cause the doe to get funny and take off.
Do you almost use it like a closing move at this point in most situations?
Generally, but I will say that
try to set up the shot.
Season after the next season, we've got a couple of really like, whoa, where it wasn't really used as a closer. So those guys finessed and figured out a way to make it work in scenarios that we've failed at in the past. So I haven't got to edit those. Those are on the season that follows the one I'm on now. So I haven't gotten a chance to kind of break down, but from what I gathered, they deployed them early because they had to, long ways out, but they went very, very cautiously and very, very slow. And that probably is the biggest thing that made it come together in those couple of scenarios.
Are there specific terrain situations that you prefer using a decoy in, or are there any terrain situations that you just like? I just know, regardless of situation, I don't like decoys in that, like, wide open ag versus timber versus CRP. Like, is there anything where you're just like, I don't love it because of a certain thing, or no?
Yeah, I mean, if you got like a jungle vegetation, thorns and briars and stuff, they're a pain. It's more bulk to get. You're going to be noisy, more clumsy. In the earlier days, I'd take it with me quite a bit in the woods, but then I found that I wasn't using my binoculars as much to pick them up. So I was getting more tails. They were picking me off before I'd pick them off. Whereas most of the time, or a lot of the times, I got good enough in the woods that I'd pick them up before they ever picked me up. But once I had that decoy in hand, I didn't do as much glassing because I'm not as hands-free. So
makes sense.
And then you got a lot more movement, and you try to, with that particular decoy, I think we tried putting a strap system on it too, but you got to weave it through stuff, and so it gets noisy if you just throw it over your back, that particular one. So
that makes sense.
The ideal situation, though, I guess the ideal situation, big buck, locked on a doe, has a couple satellite bucks. You get to watch him for a little bit, see how aggressive he is. The terrain, whether it's tall grass or, rolling hill of some sort that allows you to get in there close enough that you can break that threshold where all I got to do is pop this thing up when he's not looking. And when he does look, I'm close enough that he's going to come. That would be kind of like ideal, like slam dunk
scenario.
Yep. Oh, and don't let your arrow hit the decoy. Yeah, we got that. That's down the road.
It makes it an unfortunate noise, I would assume.
Yeah, and sends the arrow, away from the deer. I think I had that happen too on back in either, I can't remember off the top of my head if it was the broadhead that caught the side of the quiver or side of the decoy, or my tip of my longbow hit the stake on that decoy. We got a tripod stake coming out the back.
Yeah, because you're not shooting through it like an ultimate predator decoy.
Correct.
You're setting it up and kind of
that's
setting
what kind
up
of
behind
makes
it.
that ultimate predator decoy. It's very light. For compound guys, they can mount it right on their bow and shoot right through. So that makes it, pretty streamlined and pretty mobile, So
gotcha. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody. I'm sure people have, but so you've used the term satellite bucks a lot, which is similar to when you talk about elk and the herd bull and satellite bulls. I hear that all the time, but I've not heard very many people talk about satellite bucks. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
I think the word stem Chansey. Chansey's chased elk many times, and I think he started calling them satellite bucks, and I probably just picked up the lingo. So.
Is he just? I mean, when you use that term, are you basically just talking about like bucks that are trying to move in on the does that the big stud guys got locked down? And okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. I'm glad
Good.
I didn't even realize that that's not really a term that's used in the deer space.
I mean, it makes sense. I've just literally never heard anybody.
Years, like I said, I'm sure that's where it stemmed from. His chance.
Yeah. I mean, I did my first elk hunt last year, and I have more whitetail guys on than I do Western hunters, but I do try to get a decent amount of Western guys on. And I actually am really interested in elk. And you hear people talking about, satellite bulls and herd bulls all the time, but I've just never heard anybody say satellite buck. But
yeah,
I thought it was interesting. Yeah. So give us a little preview of what people are going to see this season.
Yeah, it's the one I'm working on right now. It's going to be a full 5 feature, so around 10 hours. A lot of good hunts, some big animals.
Some gnarly encounters.
Yeah. 2 of the best we've probably ever captured.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
As far as the hunter and the shot and everything, 2 of, right up there with the pinnacle. We've captured some really good ones over the years, but these 2 are right up there. On top of quite a few other really good captured hunts. Little more well oiled than normal whitetail adrenaline. So that was the other thing about hunting on the ground. There was so many failures and so much mistakes that I viewed it like catch and release, like all these encounters and failures and screw ups and blunders and stuff. And they made for great storytelling.
Yeah.
So that's my one thing with the new season. Though we've still got some screw ups and failures in there, but just maybe not at the ratio of normal whitetail adrenaline. So it's pretty well oiled. So
when's it going to be out?
Well, I haven't went public with a date. I got a date.
Okay.
I got a date in my head that it's looking pretty promising by. I can tell you I'm a lot further along than when I launched pre-order on Uncuffed. I'll say that. Just, I mean,
you don't want to commit to a date until you know for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that was talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, I can't let this go out the door till it's to this quality, but I can't hit these deadlines. I mean, I was in a bad spot there with that. And it's ultimately, I think most of our base was like, don't rush it, make it great, and get here when it gets here. And so that's what I wanted to do. So yeah, I'm more gun shy on the projection dates, but it's been going, edits been going smooth and pretty, ran into a little hiccup last week, that something that should have taken minutes. I had a technical thing and 2 days to get it straightened out. So stuff comes up, and
that's brutal.
I didn't figure out the problem, but I figured out a workaround to get around it to where I got through it. But
it's still DVD, right? Like it's not digital yet.
For now, yeah. Resurgence is on digital, but yes, digital video discs, yes.
So can Resurgence, do they have to download it from the website, or can it be purchased like off of, like how do they buy that if somebody wants to download it?
We have a link on our website where you follow the link and you can purchase it there on iTunes or Amazon. iTunes, when you get it, it's 4K. Whereas Amazon's HD.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
And they're priced the same. So
you're doing pre-orders on the new one now or no?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. No. I know there's a lot of people that came to me at the shows like whenever you put it, I'm like, thank you.
Just keep checking the website, right?
Yeah.
People can find you just real quick, website, Instagram page, YouTube. Where can they track you down?
Yeah. Well, Whitetail Adrenaline, whitetail.adrenaline.com is our website. And then all the social medias, YouTube and whatnot, Whitetail Adrenaline. Now YouTube, we have a YouTube channel, but it's not our hunts, our full feature hunts.
You got your teasers on there.
Yeah, there's some trailer videos, and I guess we didn't really talk about that. We don't do sponsors and partners to fund it. We try to produce the best quality we can, and then the customer actually purchases it, which keeps it very authentic and allows us to produce it with no restraints, essentially.
Yeah, I should have brought that up. I guess I just made the assumption that people that know you know that, but I guess not everyone knows you, but not yet anyway. Yeah. I don't know anybody who doesn't know you, at least nobody that I know.
Yeah, no, there's plenty. There's plenty. I mean, trust me. If you're producing DVDs in 2025, there's a lot that don't know about you.
Yeah, I think there's some uniqueness to that, though. I mean, I do agree with you from the standpoint of, hey, we want to put out something that's really, really good. And not that people who do digital don't put out something that's good, but the fact that those people are, most of the time they're taking sponsorships to cover their costs, right? Yeah. And you're just choosing, we're not going to take sponsorships. We're going to cover our costs by the purchase of the product that we put out. And if we don't put out a good product, people aren't going to buy it. But if we do, that's going to cover it.
Right. Well, then
so far it has.
Years ago in the early days, I loved that because that held me accountable to produce a worthwhile enough product that people would purchase it. And that's just how our model is structured.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was 18 years ago, and the industry and companies were quite a bit different back then, to where they're not so bombarding nowadays. But we've done it this way for so long. We like it this way, but yeah, back in that era, it was almost like you got to turn your show into an infomercial back then, whereas as time went on, I think the companies and everything, they wanted to show more authentic hunting and keep it more about hunting, and just the products are there a little bit. And so, but back then, yeah, it was different era.
Commercials basically for products. Yeah.
And I do agree with you. So much of our base has loyally supported us, and they love that aspect of it. And it would change it to a certain degree if we did change that, and did sponsors and partners.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, it's part of who you are, which I think people respect and really like about y'all. I mean, it's one of the things when I hear people talk about Whitetail Adrenaline, that's one of the things that always comes up is, I know they're not paid for. I know that everything they do is because they believe in it, and this is how they do it. And that they're not that everyone who takes a sponsor does do that, but it's just like you said, it's part of who your brand is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great companies out there that a lot of them. It's like products that I actually really like and everything, but I would have to kind of change some things there, and so it might get a little messy, and change things a little bit there, but there's certainly a lot of great products and companies that I could get behind,
Mm-hmm.
but I just like the hunters being able to show up and they're running whatever, and no camo, whatever bow, whatever gun, it's more true to, I think, everyday common people hunting.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you jumping on, brother. Yeah. This is awesome getting a chance to finally talk to you. Yeah. Thanks for pointing out to everybody where to go.
Yeah.
Can't wait till it comes out, man.
Thank you.
I wish it was out now. I got a long flight in about 5 days.
We wish we could turn them quicker.
But I am downloading Resurgence so that I can watch that on my flight on Friday.
Awesome.
Thanks for being on, Jared. I appreciate it, man.
You bet.
All right. See you, brother.
Yep. See ya.